We want to welcome everyone to our final webinar of the year, but it's not our final webinar. We'll have another series next year, which Kim will talk about in more detail at the end. But right now, I want to introduce our guest speaker, Reverend Meredith McNabb. Uh, she is a friend and colleague of ours, and she's the Associate Director for Education at Indiana University's Lake Institute on Faith and Giving, where she provides leadership for the Executive Certificate in Religious Fundraising and the Cultivating Generous Congregations courses. And I believe Kim Matthews is a graduate of that program. Uh, she's also a lawyer preacher, so we won't hold that against her because we like lawyer preachers. She's an attorney by training and an ordained clergy member of the United Methodist Church in the Virginia Conference. She also serves as Associate District Superintendent for the Central District in Indiana, working with clergy appointed to serve part-time, and she's a member of the General Conference delegation from Virginia. So we crossed paths for several years as as clergy delegates for General Conference. Uh, from 2014 to 2019, she served as the director of the Center for Clergy Excellence in Virginia, overseeing clergy formation, continuing ed, and accountability for all 1,600 clergy members in Virginia. Meredith and her family live in Indianapolis. We panicked a little bit because we wondered if that was Central Time, right about the time the webinar was going to start, and we learned that it's the very western point of Eastern Time, so that was good for us. And Meredith's spouse teaches at the Indiana University School of Medicine. Meredith, we're so glad you're with us, and thank you for being here. Take it away.
Well, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeff and Kim, and delighted to be with all of you. Glad to bring good tidings from Indianapolis and from Indiana University. Um, Excited to introduce you. If you don't know the School of Philanthropy at IU or Lake Institute on Faith and Giving, we are responsible within the School of Philanthropy, kind of like the dental school and the law school. We're a whole school in the university that studies giving. And Lake Institute gets to be part of thinking about how it is that faith shapes our giving and how faith-based institutions like congregations grapple with philanthropy, with giving, with the practice of generosity. Um, Jeff mentioned the Executive Certificate in Religious Fundraising, which is a course. If you are really interested in this, I hope you might check it out. I also want to point you to the resource library. We're going to focus on telling the story of congregations in light of giving tonight, but if you have interest in other topics, there's a lot of resources, open access at our resource library, and I hope that you will check that out. Um, Tonight, want to sort of set the stage. I work with lots and lots of congregations, religious nonprofits every year, and one relatively common challenge across all of them, all different sizes, all different parts of the country, is that it is tough to think about how you distill what it is that you do into something that you can say or write or post on the internet in a way that people who aren't already on the inside will understand and will relate to and will, we hope, be drawn towards. I once heard the quip that for an increasing number of people, seeing a church is a little like seeing a funeral home. You have a vague idea of what goes on in there, but you don't really want to push too hard to find out too much more, and you don't really want to be involved any more than you have to be. But of course, if we're going to invite people to get involved, to make gifts of their attention and their time and their money, we have to be really, really clear about what it is that we do and who it is that we are. And we have to tell that story in ways that people can hear and can understand, can relate to. And of course, it's not just the outsiders. If you are with folks who are anything like the other folks that I work with, in a good many of our places, if we were to ask even key leaders what it is that our church is all about, I mean, I hope that they would get the Jesus part right. Maybe even the making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world part. But in my experience, if we push very much and say, yeah, but in your congregation, specifically, what is it that you're all about? A good many of even our core leaders, maybe even ourselves, might be hard pressed to tell that story clearly and concisely and in a way that helps people to respond and to participate with us. Tonight, want to talk a little about the landscape of religious giving, where we're telling these stories, where we're making these invitations, who's hearing them, where are they coming from? But then I want to spend most of our time offering some practical considerations of how you might think about telling the story of your church, telling the story of your ministries in a way that lets people really come alongside you and join in that good work, join in that good news. Uh, want to start with this landscape of religious giving and religious involvement. Increasingly, all across the country, fewer and fewer people are growing up in or are staying connected to religious congregations. Uh, Gallup offers this sobering poll, this sobering research, noting that in 2020, congregational membership, again, across all kinds of houses of faith, all traditions, all sizes, all geographies, on the whole, US membership in congregations dropped below 50%. Now, in your particular town, in your city, in your county, it might be different, of course. But this sense of everybody belongs somewhere is plummeting, and has been really for several decades at this point. Uh, it's also really stretches back farther than that. This is not a millennial problem. This is not a Gen Z thing. Boomers, this is you. It means though that we've got multiple generations out there who increasingly don't have a background in a faith community. This matters for the storytelling because quite often the story that I hear congregations lean toward when they want to tell who they are and talk about what they're about, it's a nostalgia story. They want to say, remember Christmas Eve church when you were a kid. Remember vacation Bible school crafts and games from when you were young, when you went to grandma's church. Uh, that's a nostalgia storytelling. That is not an evil impulse. I don't want to knock those good memories. They are precious. I have them. I have told those stories in different times and places. But those nostalgia stories are a shorthand. And increasingly, it's a shorthand that people just don't understand. That more and more people around us don't have those memories. They themselves didn't grow up going to Christmas Eve church, but neither did their parents, maybe even their grandparents. Um, we have to work on telling a story that actually invites people into what we mean by that shorthand of Vacation Bible School crafts and games. Wow, remember when you felt loved and engaged and like you could participate in the learning with people where it was fun and interesting and you knew the people cared about you. That's what we mean by Vacation Bible School memories, but we got to name it. We can't just shorthand it in those kinds of ways anymore. Another trend that may be sobering for you. If half the country doesn't belong to a household of faith at this point, half the country doesn't give financially to organized charitable institutions. At roughly the same time scale, around the early 2020s, uh, tracking that below 50% of Americans are making financial gifts over $25 to a recognized charitable institution. This isn't just to religious institutions, but to any organized charitable institution. Now, this is not to say that Americans aren't generous. There's, as you know, tremendous response to disasters, person to person giving, people giving to family, people sending money to family overseas or in difficult situations. There is certainly a generous impulse among Americans of all types, but institutionally directed giving, institutionally channeled giving through nonprofits, through congregations is down. And really all kinds of giving do seem to be wavering a bit. Thinking particularly about religious organization giving to congregations, to denominations, to missionaries, to religious publishing. In the studies about the giving, that's what giving to religion means. So, not counting a religiously affiliated hospital or a religiously affiliated school or food bank or anything like that, just to religion. You notice that that also is perhaps a lot lower than where people might expect. For a lot of us, or at least for some of the leaders that we might be serving with, there might be an assumption that people are given somewhere. We just want to get them to give to and through us. Uh, but faith-based giving to religious causes, because of course people give to all kinds of causes because of their faith, uh, care for the poor, welcome for the stranger, support for the orphan, education and healthcare, and all of those good causes, people give to them because of their faith. But again, this is just thinking about how people are giving to places like our churches. Just about a third of people in our region, I'll claim myself as a Virginian at heart, um, are making gifts to religious organizations. I know I wouldn't necessarily group West Virginia in with Georgia and Florida either, but the sociologist who worked up this map lumped us all together with this South Atlantic group. But really, other regions have even lower percentages of households making these kinds of gifts. Uh, Again, knowing why one might give and actually giving to congregations is not as high as a lot of people might think. There isn't a default piece where people are giving to churches and we just have to steward those gifts well. We have to tell the story in a compelling and meaningful way. Just one more scene setting piece here. Um, why are people not giving? Why are people not engaged in households of faith? This is a piece about trust that I think is one really key factor. There are probably a lot of them, but I want to highlight this sense of how little people trust each other and trust organizations. You'll see here on this slide, and I'll be glad to share these slides with the participants here in the webinar, that just about 40% of people think that nonprofits will mostly do the right thing. Just over 30% of people think religious institutions will mostly do the right thing. Those are really low numbers. I mean, they're higher than anything else, as you see. They're even higher than how much we trust that other people will generally do the right thing. That's just over 20%. Uh, but just to think about, 30% of people think that congregations will mostly do the right thing. That's that's agonizingly low, and you all know that your churches are very trustworthy. But there's a real gap there in how people understand and perceive religious institutions, and that translates into their engagement with their time, with their advocacy, and with their giving. Um, this is a part of how it is that we have to think about how we're telling the story of our ministry. The days of really robust giving to churches with having to do very much more than say, it's time for the offering, or there's this important thing happening, or here's the budget projections, have at it. Those days are done. We have to tell the story of who we are and what we do as churches and as other ministries. And we have to tell the story of why giving is good for people in the first place, why this matters to practice generosity, and how it might be for people to get involved. So let me shift out of thinking about the landscape of where we're telling these stories, and think about how it is that we're telling the stories. Especially telling the story of who we are and what we do with an eye to fundraising and development. Now, I want to pause for just a second and affirm fundraising is not a bad word. I imagine that if you are here tonight, you already know that in your heart. This is a chance to invite people to join us in the work that matters. We are inviting people to make gifts, for sure, gifts of their time and their talent and their treasure, as we often say in the church. But this is meaningful. This is not arm twisting work. I hope that you might be familiar with Henry Nouwen and the book A Spirituality of Fundraising. If this is work that you are involved in, let me recommend that to you as a potentially really transformative piece. And the one that I have pictured here is the workbook edition. It's got some great devotional material if you need to use that for your stewardship committee, or another group within the church. But I wanted to highlight this quotation that Nouwen offers of pointing out fundraising is the opposite of begging. Uh, we are not begging, we're not twisting arms, we're not manipulating people. This is not sad puppy dog fundraising. This is hope focused and dignity centered, good news sharing kinds of storytelling that's meant to invite people into a vision that matters. We're inviting people into answering their own calls from God to do good in the world, with what they have and with who they are. This is good and important. So I hope that you are with me on reclaiming the idea of fundraising as a really a piece of ministry, when we're doing it with integrity and with care, and with the good things of God in mind. Um, just a basic walkthrough here. None of this is rocket science, but just to break down some of the steps of why storytelling for fundraising and development is so important. Money follows mission, and you got to tell the story of the mission to help people know that they would want to join that vision, and lend their resources, again, time, talent, and treasure, into the good cause. Um, we are not encouraging you to launch your giving story based on give here and get into heaven, or the corollary, don't give here and go to hell. No, 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 not anything about this. This is not a give here or else mentality. This is a way of inviting people into what matters. So, of course, you have to get clear about who you are and what you do. That mission and vision work is foundational to the whole endeavor. And then you have to tell the story of that, and really help people imagine what it is that you do. For so many churches, the first pass of the story is, well, we're the church on Main Street, or we're the church at the corner where the farm is. Well, but what's the actual story there? Being able to communicate the story of our work and our existence is absolutely essential. And part of what we're doing there is that we're connecting what we do to how it's the donor who is doing those things. They are coming alongside us, they are joining in with their prayers, with their gifts and resources. It is not just the donor helping us do a thing. So often we make ourselves the heroes of our own story. Um, I want to invite you to consider how it is that you have the donor in mind as a protagonist of the story of what you do. They can join in the action. They help move the action forward as they make gifts, as they lend their enthusiasm and their energy to the work. Um, Following along in just the basic practice and cycle here, we do want to invite people to make gifts and to receive those gifts well. We're going to thank people promptly. We're going to handle those gifts securely. All of that good technical stuff that the foundation is so good at helping folks to think about. Uh, we're going to continue to make sure that we are doing the things that we say we're doing. That the story that we're telling, that the mission and vision that we are putting out there really is the ministry that we're doing. And if they start to diverge, either what we're doing or how we talk about it has to change so that that is really, really locked up. And we are helping people to trust that we know what we're doing and that we are transparent about what we do and how we do it. Uh, but also, as we're checking those outcomes and making sure that we are still on point, we have more stories to tell. And the cycle continues and starts all over as we continue to make sure that people can hear what's happening. Um, Prospective donors want to hear it. They might not know it yet, but they want to know what's happening. Your donors, your existing donors, want to know what's happening. They want to be able to tell that story themselves. Uh, it's a gift to help empower the people who give to and through us to be able to tell the story themselves. And that kind of peer-to-peer advocacy where a giver can say how excited they are, how meaningful they find it, that they and their church are doing X, Y, and Z. That is such a key part of storytelling and development, of helping people to connect and to find meaning and joy in the ministry that you're doing. Now, to pull back to where we started, of course, you do have to have that mission and vision in mind. Again, this is where I think sometimes congregations have a tougher job of telling the story than some of our mission partners do. Um, our friends at Habitat, at the food bank, they come and give mission moments during worship, and people get it when they tell their story. Nonprofits in general are really good at telling the story of who they are. If you feed hungry people, that's super clear. If you protect vulnerable kids, that's really clear. If you care about environmental protection, it might not be everybody's cup of tea to join in that story, but it's clear and it's easy to tell the story of what it is you do and who you are. Here in the church, we do things like create communities of love and justice and moral formation. We equip people to live in love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and all the rest. We live as the body of Christ in our neighborhoods. These are all things that I mean, I have certainly given my vocational life to. Uh, these are things that are really close to the heart of people who have lived this. But they are things that are maybe more opaque to people who haven't been a part of a church community. Uh, what does being the body of Christ mean to somebody who perhaps generationally is not a part of a church? Uh, there are folks who've been part of really hurtful and harmful church communities, that they have not experienced those communities of love and joy and peace and justice at all. Remember that low trust level. Folk aren't just going to believe us. We have to tell the story of what's happening. We have to bring the evidence to make the case of who we are and why this is so important and so good for us and so good for our neighbors and such a point of connection to what God is doing. Um, Thinking about telling the stories. So, number one, we got to tell true stories. Can't lie. We have to tell stories that we're allowed to tell. Some of the most tender and powerful stories of what happens in a congregation, they're just not our stories to share. if we're going to be upholding people's dignity and respecting their privacy and not creating, again, that sort of manipulative sad puppy dog fundraising. We want to tell the stories that we're allowed to tell. We also have to tell stories that people can follow. Your English teacher was right. We need a beginning, a middle, and an end. We need to include the interesting and the helpful details. What time of year was the story? What's the person's name? Who's the main character in the story? How old are they? Is there anything that's specific to your place in the story of what happened? Um, these are the pieces that just basic good storytelling pulls forward. But thinking about storytelling for fundraising, and I realize this is a little bit small print here. I want to offer this storytelling pyramid as one way to think about what kind of story are we telling and how high can we aim on this pyramid? How many of these layers can we involve in the stories that we tell of our ministries? So often our stories get stuck down at that base functional level. We just say what happened. What was the program? What do we offer? We had 7 teenagers who met for a Bible study for 9 weeks this year. That's not a bad story. I mean, you have teenagers who are doing a Bible study over time. Awesome. But what about the emotional level? What emotions can you include in that story? Did the students enjoy the study? Did they get surprised along the way? Were the leaders excited about it? Were they intimidated to dive into the Bible with teenagers? Is there some element of the story that you can engage the listeners or the readers' emotions, where they might be surprised, where their heart might be warmed along the way? But even beyond those emotional pieces, how can we tell stories of what we're doing that engage these social and aspirational levels, that help people to feel themselves drawn in and maybe drawn up by it? In this example of the Bible study with the teenagers, was it fun? Were there funny parts? Were there touching parts where people really cared for each other, as so often happens in Bible studies? Were there intergenerational connections that got made? Did the students ask questions? Were their questions were welcomed in a good UMC kind of way? Uh, all of those kinds of details or angles to a story, how can those weave into the stories that we tell about the programs that we offer, about the ministry encounters that we have, that can help draw people in and help them connect and want to be more a part of what's happening, not just understand what's happening, but to really feel it and to want to be a part of it and to feel inspired by it. Now, all to say that all of this is just good storytelling in general. But the thing about this being important for fundraising, for development and stewardship work, is that these are the kinds of things that help your hearer or your reader imagine themselves into the story and to see how they can help something happen that matters, which is what happens in our churches. Things happen all the time that matter quite a lot. Uh, Sometimes it can be a little daunting, though, because things are happening that matter all the time. And perhaps you're thinking, yeah, but a bunch of the things that matter are the things that you just said I can't put out there because they're not my story to tell. I want to offer a few prompts here that might spark your attention or your memory for stories that you could tell, stories that you could maybe get permission to tell. Maybe better yet, stories that you could get the people who were involved to tell themselves. And you can record them on video, you can capture them on audio, transcribe it, incorporate their own words as you write and tell these stories. But one potential prompt: when a young person's life was changed through your church's work. Some young person whose life was changed through who you are and what you do. What happened there? Now, I certainly work with a number of small churches here in Indiana, some of which really don't have young people in their membership at this point. But they are still impacting young people in their midst. Grandchildren come to visit. There's an elementary school in the neighborhood. Maybe young gets a little stretched, and you mean somebody who's just starting out in their career or in a marriage or in some other earlier stage of life. Thinking through how is a young person's life changed in your church might yield a really great story that helps to show what you do, who you are, and helps to draw the hearer into it to want to be a part of it through their gifts, their time, and their giving. Another prompt potentially, a person's faith life was changed through our work when. Uh, did somebody become more forgiving, more loving, more peaceful? Did somebody have a change of heart, a reconciliation with their own past, with someone else? Um, Someone find hope? Uh, y'all, we have stories of faith transformation in our midst, and it they may not come to mind immediately, but if you can sit around with a leadership team, it's a great exercise for church council to work on some of these story prompts. How can you start to collect those stories? A lot of these people want to tell you this story. There are certainly going to be some where it's going to be private and it's not going to be a story that you can tell in this kind of way. But what a great thing to be able to hone in on those testimonies in a great way. Uh, Less personal, but still really important to storytelling for fundraising. What's the story about how your congregation got started? Uh, this is where your archivist, your history buffs, really matter. What do they know? What do they remember? What have they heard about what's the story for how your church came to be? That's a really great fundraising story on two different levels. It might just be a really compelling story that helps you remember that people had a dream, they had a vision from God, they had a calling to do something really big and important. You might discover that there's a painful story of why that church got started. That is certainly true for any number of our institutions. In that case, how are you all reconciled about that story? Um, if your story, if your church got started because of a schism in another church, how do you come to peace about that and kind of excavate that DNA and have the positive but true story where you can really wrestle with it. It can be healing to get that sort of thing out on the table, and it can really be inspiring and enlivening to realize who has gone before us and what our ancestors' story is in this place. And then finally, I would just propose, just in general, how has an outsider to your church been positively affected by your church? Um, Somebody has to have been positively affected who's not inside the club. Uh, what's the story there? What are the details that you can use to really help people see how it is that you reflect the light of Christ, how it is that you are the body of Christ, where the fruit of the Spirit are bearing out in your life together. There's good stories here that really matter and that are worth telling. Um, I hope that these prompts are actually maybe even sparking for you some actual stories. I know also, though, it can feel a little daunting to just, oh, wait, how do I tell a story about this? This is a place where collecting these stories over time, um, trying to get leaders to have their eyes peeled, their ears out to remember and notice them. So often, the really great faith stories about what's happening in our congregations, they kind of just slip past, and we give thanks to God for them, and then they're gone. Capture them. Um, just make a note, collect them somewhere. We'll talk about kind of a framework for thinking about that in a moment. But these are too precious to let slide past completely, especially when they can be illustrative for people who don't know what happens in a church, and they certainly don't know the good things that happen in a church. How can you tell those true stories in ways that people go, "Oh, oh, that's why this matters. That's why I would get involved. That's why I would give here," in some really good ways. That's also true, again, for the insiders too. It is good for us to tell the story over and over again of who we are and why we're here, and to really remind ourselves the difference that Holy Spirit is making through what we do in our places, and through the ministries that happen. um, Thinking about how it is that we tell these stories. I mentioned before we can have a temptation to kind of make ourselves the hero of the story, make ourselves as the church the hero of the story. And so I want to just invite you into maybe a little thought experiment here, um, around the Good Samaritan. You all know this parable. You know it very well. You have heard sermons about it. You have given sermons about it. But just to summarize, of course, there's a man walking on the Jericho Road. It's a dangerous road. He gets attacked and beat up and left for dead at the side of the road. A priest comes by. He is not helpful. Pharisee comes by. Also, you would hope that the chair of church council would be helpful. They're not. And then a Samaritan comes by. And they are, at the time that Jesus is telling this parable, that is an outgroup member. Racially, politically, whoever's not you in your community and is suspect, that's the person who comes by and helps. Uh, Bandages the wounded man, cares for him, puts him on the back of his own animal, takes him to an inn. Uh, what happens there? The Samaritan says, I'm gonna have to travel on, but you take care of this man, to the innkeeper. And he gives the innkeeper money and says, if it costs more, I'll be back in a few days and I'll cover it. And of course, Jesus's question out of this parable is who was a neighbor to the injured man. Uh, but I think all of us who engage this text have perhaps taken it from different perspectives and different people in the story. Saint Augustine, one of his sermons about the Good Samaritan was actually about the innkeeper. When he says, what we are all doing is the work of the innkeeper. We are trying to receive each other as well as we can. As we are called by God to do something, we get to receive each other. At Lake, we like to talk about this in terms of fundraising, to point out that we are in keeping when we are inviting people to come in and do the thing that they care about, or perhaps the thing that we are helping them learn to care about, that we are helping them to accomplish the thing that matters, that's their call from God. Uh, Most people are not wild about just giving money to inns. They want the inn to do a thing that matters. In the story, the inn and the innkeeper have to be trustworthy. Uh, Certainly wouldn't want that man to be further harmed by where they are. The Samaritan is bringing the person there because something good can happen for them. Something that lets the Samaritan do the thing that he's been called to do. This is us doing the work of innkeeping. As we are telling the story of who we are and what we do, we're trying to tell that story in a way that lets would-be Good Samaritans imagine and see themselves as helping to build up the ways of faith in young people or in a broader community, helping to live out kingdom values, helping God to be made known in our places. helping to care for the most vulnerable, celebrate beauty, whatever it is that you are doing in your church, you're telling the story so that people can exercise their own call to join in that work, and to be a part of it, not just to help you do that good work, but for them themselves to see, I can participate in something that really matters. As we're helping people to do that, I want to turn towards some practicalities before we move to some Q&A here. In the world of professional fundraising, we talk about telling the story of who we are and what we do as building up our case for support. Um, no matter what kind of story we're telling, an invitation for folks to join us in the ministry, the story that we tell is not, please, can you come help us out? Because lately it's been tough around here. The Association of Fundraising Professionals dictionary defines the case as why we both need and merit people's philanthropic support. Talking about what it is that we do, and where we're going. Uh, Needing and meriting the giving that people might give. But the definition goes on to point out that in the story that we tell about our organization, about our ministry, that we're trying to aim high. We're trying to get to those top levels of that storytelling pyramid that are drawing people in. As the definition says, providing perspective, arousing a sense of history and continuity, conveying a feeling of importance and relevance and urgency. And this part I love, and having whatever's needed to warm the heart and stir the mind. Good United Methodists, we believe in that warmed heart, and the stirred mind. We are trying to help people engage with us and know something about us, and to feel inspired. Um, a case for support is also, I think one way to think of it is in making your case. Jeff mentioned I am an attorney by training. Like in court, as we are doing our storytelling, across the whole of it, we are assembling the evidence to persuade the jury. um, you can't lie, it's got to be true. But we're collecting the facts and the figures, we're collecting the pictures and the stories. We're developing the overall framing for who we are and what we do as to how we can tell the story in a way that lets them want to give to and through our ends. Um, just thinking again with some of the technical pieces from professional fundraising, there is one sense of building your internal case for the church itself. That's the whole briefcase. You're not going to tell everything all at once. You're not going to tell every single story you've got all the time. You're going to collect them all and have the facts and figures to back them up as needed. And then you're going to be able to pick and choose what's the right story, the right data point for any given audience at any given moment. The internal case is going through all of those story prompts with your leadership and gathering them all up. The external case statement is when you start actually telling the story, and getting one story out for any one particular audience. This might be in a social media post. This might be out loud. This might be in a newsletter. There's all kinds of case statements that we're putting out there that are for one particular audience. And that's a place where we're getting to tell the story of who we are. When we are presenting our case in those storytelling moments, just a few bullet pointers here, to be simple, to be definitive, to be positive, but honest, of course, to use the stories and the images that make it sticky. When you tell a story that's got that beginning and middle and end, that's got some of those pertinent details that help people imagine themselves into it, they're sticky. People hear it, they remember it, and they're drawn to want to know more. Um, Recognizing that we in the church can offer a lot of things where we assume that people know more than they do. Let me just invite you to not assume that your audience knows you. Sometimes church insiders really don't know all the pieces that we would want to share with them. Um, I want to encourage you to use strong language, not, of course, strong language in the sense of vulgarities, but uh, brag just a little. Tell the story of what you do and why it matters with some strength, with some confidence. We know that it's God who's doing all of these good things, but we are co-laborers in this, and it is good to name that clearly and positively, and with some strength and confidence there. And then finally, collaborating your collateral is just a way of saying, don't tell the story in a way that is for some other place. You know your people. You know how it is that people are going to be able to hear that story. Does this need to be only in a sermon? Does this need to be in writing? Does this need to be on video with pictures and with the people involved hearing it? Calibrate how it is that you're telling the story to match how your people hear stories. There is nothing the matter with um, telling the story in different facets in different ways. Because when you get some of these great stories pulled together that show who you are, where you can talk about that one kid who showed up that one Sunday and what happened, uh, that likely is going to be a story that you tell in a lot of different ways. Um, that is an okay thing. I think sometimes we think we have to have a whole new story every time we gather when we're telling the story of who we are for inviting people to make gifts. Tell that same story because it's core and it demonstrates who you are and what you're about. I want to make sure that we have some time here for questions. So let me just finish for a moment here to go back to Nowan uh, of just reminding you that this is good ministry. When you are telling the story of your church's ministry with an eye to how people might join you, that's not manipulative. That is, I mean, I hope, I suppose you could do it in a manipulative way, but I don't think that you would. You are approaching this with integrity and with care because you're inviting people to join you in something that matters. You're inviting people to make what they have, whether it's much or whether it's little, as Henry Nouwen says here, making what they have available to God. That is worth doing. That is good news. And helping people to imagine themselves into the ministries in our places can be really, really important. Life changing, faith building. People join in with their advocacy and their prayers. They join in with their volunteering and with their skills. They join in with their money. All of those are really important ways that folks can extend their own generosity and really important ways that they can get involved with your story in a way that lets them be a part of what God is doing to transform our communities and to transform the world for Jesus Christ. Um, with that, let me get out of slides, and I think Kim might be around, and I hope we have some questions and conversation.
Well, there we go. I'm pushing buttons, nothing's happening. Do feel free to put your questions in either the chat or the Q&A. To get us started, I do have a question for you, Meredith. Before I was at the foundation, I was asked to do one of the times when you stand up in church and you talk about why you donate to the church and why it's important to you. And I was just kind of thrown into the pool with no guidance. How can we coach people we invite to do that so they feel more confident and they actually tell their story effectively for the congregation?
Yes. Ooh, The story of the donor. First off, I think a lot of our folks, I'm so glad that you said yes to that. I think a lot of folks, you're combining getting into your business, talking about your giving, with public speaking, and people say, thank you, I am out on both counts. I think certainly if you've got folks who are at peace about their own giving, who recognize that it is a great way to share what they've been blessed with, and that they feel confident to talk about what that's meant in their own lives, maybe talking about their own finances or their relationships within their family, talking about giving, making those stories personal. Again, where they are the protagonist of the story. It's not, oh, when we gave the gift because we love this and this and this. I mean, that's great, but what does it actually mean to the people? I think helping them to think of their beginning, middle, and end. What is the dramatic arc of their story? Can be a helpful thing. Was that an automatic agreement with their spouse? Or did they come at giving differently? That already is a little dramatic arc. People might not want to talk about that. In that case, what did they discover? How have they found something that mattered about giving for them, where they've been inspired, where they've been challenged? I think the most effective one of these that I ever heard was a person who stood up and said, I just don't even know why I give, but I tried it once and it felt great. And so I just kept doing it. And I have to say that was so refreshing as opposed to kind of a canned answer. I think another way, though, to invite folks to think about telling their giving story is actually to come at it slant, and invite them to tell the story of who taught them about generosity, who's been important in their lives as a model, as a mentor in giving. Suddenly, they're not talking about themselves; they're talking about their dad or their grandma or that neighbor who was always really generous. Suddenly they are giving voice to generosity and pointing it out in a generous way that can sometimes kind of reduce people's anxiety. um, if it's just to talk about the programs of the church, anybody can give that talk, and I hope that people will give it in the ways that we talked about, that are engaging and drawing people forward. If you've got somebody who's going to stand up and give a testimony about their own giving, let's let them be the main character about what that has meant in their lives.
We know the chat is working. We tested it out. If there are any questions, please go ahead and share those, and we'll ask Meredith those questions.
And for those who have not looked at the chat, Kim and I did both put in the chat that we have multiple copies of the Nowen book, Spirituality of Fundraising, and we'll make that available. We'll give you a free copy if you just ask for it. We give those away, many copies every year. It's one of our favorites.
When I first found, yeah, it is a great book.
And such a great thing to study with the people who are responsible for the giving. I think a lot of folks are coming into this work without necessarily a whole lot of formation, or may not be thinking about kind of what this means faith-wise, not only bottom line wise. And that's such a useful resource.
We do have a question. This is, let me pull it over here so I don't have to look to the side. Do you find that committees or teams find the Nowen study helpful, or do they feel pressure?
Well, I know when I am leading studies of it, I want to start with, what spoke to you and where would you push back on Nowen? Because he's also writing in 1991. The world is a little different now, and so some pieces maybe don't land as well, but an awful lot of it is really just engaging with scripture. So in the sense of, do people feel challenged? I mean, the texts in the Bible about giving are pretty challenging. So I don't think that people necessarily come through completely untouched, but we wouldn't want that. I think also, though, it's how you can frame it as a leader of, we're not twisting arms. We're just not. This is not about pressure. This is not about buying your way into heaven. This is not about anything that people might have a bad taste about. This is about using what we have and who we are for the good things that God is calling us to, which, I mean, that's not a no pressure kind of a thing. Good stewardship is a big deal, for all of us, for our lives and our resources. But I actually find that it's a really good source of conversation, where people can kind of say, "Oh, I actually have had that thought," and Henry Nolan says some really interesting things here about um, the challenge of our care for the poor creating a prejudice against the rich. Ooh, I mean that uh my former Bishop Pennell used to describe things as plowing a little close to the corn at times. And I mean, I think that starts to plow a little close to the corn, but that's important, I think, for us to get out on the table and say, what do I think about money? What do I think about giving? What a good thing to have the team kind of at peace about all of that.
Good answer.
Other questions? Jeff, you have anything you want to bring up before we close?
Well, I would just say briefly, I remembered the time that I was asked to give that 5-minute stewardship talk, and I consulted with my dad uh, about, how should I build this talk. He encouraged me to use the vows the baptismal vows, and build a talk on. At that time, it was prayers, presence, gifts, service.
Mhm.
Of course, now we would add witness. So I did my talk. I was pretty proud of myself, and I took my note cards uh, with me the next time I visited my parents. And he called me out because he realized that I spent all my time talking about prayers, presence, and service, and very little about giving. And the fact is, I was embarrassed about my giving at that time and didn't want to talk about it. So I trumpeted everything I was good at. So it is challenging to think about these things, and even just to reflect on them privately, but then to give a witness causes you to really think about whether your heart is in the right place.
Jeff, I think you're absolutely right. We get time and talent, and then treasure comes, a little late. I know one course participant that I was working with, they actually expanded time, talent, treasure, and truck. How are you using what you have for the goodness of God? There's just ways, as you say, to help people get reconciled.
Yeah,
When we're at peace, again, whether we have a lot or whether we have a little, the piece is making it available to God, with what we can, and being a part of that journey.
Absolutely. There are no more questions on our list, so thank you, Meredith, for this excellent
yes,
webinar. It was wonderful, and I know our participants enjoyed it as well and learned things. I want to mention that I want to thank the participants for attending. We are glad you were here. An email will be going out as soon as our communication specialist, Allie Sears, has the video ready. An email will go out to all those who registered with a link to the recording of this webinar and other resources that were mentioned. We already have one request for the book in the chat, so if you'd like to, I'm looking to see things are happening over here. I'm sorry. If you would like a copy of that book, you can email us at info@umfwv.org or drop it in the chat and we'll see it. Also, I want to let you know that we are in the midst of planning for our webinars and an in-person academy for 2025. Tomorrow, you will receive a survey link from Allie that asks you some questions. What would you like to see next year? What would be helpful to you in those webinars? And we will try to incorporate people's wants and needs in that plan. So we want to hear from you so you can help shape it for 2025. Which leads me to say that if you don't subscribe to our newsletter by email, Insights, our newsletter, you can go to umfwv.org and subscribe. So you'll be on top of all the information about upcoming webinars and that in-person academy, which will be in the fall. So if there's anything else, Jeff, that we need to mention before we close?
I don't think so. We just want to thank Meredith for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you all so much.
I did take the certificate course on religious fundraising, and Meredith was one of the teachers, and I was so glad when she said yes that she'd come talk to us here because I wanted you to hear what she had to say.
Yeah.
So watch for a new webinar in the next year, and we will see you then or sooner, I hope. Thank you for being here tonight. Good night.
Thank you.